final exercise 19. As a heads up, the whole exercise might easily take up 30 to 40 minutes of your time. The idea is, first of all, to give you another example for calculation. Also, you will learn how to defend with calculation, and finally it should also teach you the discipline and the patience of going through all the lines without missing some. So it is not an easy exercise and it is not intended to be one, but I would advise you to stick to the routine and follow the advices. So to the position, black is a rook up, but white has a huge attack on the king. That means if you would survive the attack, then automatically the position is basically won. So all you need to do is simply to calculate all the attacking possibilities that white has in this position and make sure that after your move you are not losing. Usually there are not many lines to calculate in a regular game, even if white is attacking, but in this position there are a lot of different threats. Therefore, my first question for you would be, what are the possible candidates that black can play in this position at all? Now let's discuss the candidates without calculating any lines yet. So you need to spot that the rook is attacked. That means you don't want to lose it, and probably you will think about playing rook to e8 first. And this is, positionally a sound move, but you need to calculate it whether, you are not losing after rook f8, and you will see in the end that rook f8 is indeed troublesome. So instead you should also see the other options, and most certainly the wrong way to continue this position is simply playing rook f8 without thinking about any further sequences of lines. So instead, all the possibilities I will show you right away. So these are these four. For the rook, I will dismiss rook b8 and rook e8, so technically maybe in some variation that might be the only move, but we just stick to these three, this is enough. Then you can also move the other rook and still keep the rook protected. So for example, you could play rook to c8. You could actually play rook to e7. Don't worry that you lose the exchange, since losing the exchange might be still better than losing the game, and after all you still have some material advantage, so might not be the worst continuation. And also rook to e7 also does protect the rook on e8. And finally, you can also protect the rook with the queen, for example with the moves queen to d7 and queen to a4. So if you want this exercise as the hardcore version, then your goal is to see all these different continuations and find out which ones of these are losing by force. If you do that, you will solve the exercise and find the solution. If you are a bit overwhelmed by this task, then it's fine. I will flip the board and we will go through all of these moves one by one. And I'll do that. So let's forget about the lines, flip the board, and it's white to move. So usually you should start with the most obvious insane replies. That means rook f8 is usually the first move that you should calculate as black and as white, but for this exercise I will start with the most trivial bad moves and continuing with the more complicated lines to refute. So let's start with the easiest choice. So what should white play after rook c8? Okay, the answer is easy, just queen take g7, it's a maiden one. Okay, so what about rook e8 to c8? Well, this also loses to the bishop takes g7, and once black takes, queen takes e6 with a double attack on c8, on g8, meaning we win the rook. So what about the next move? That will be rook to f7. How does white win there? The solution is white simply takes on g7, and if black takes with the rook, then we play queen takes e8 with 2 pawns up, and also h5 is hanging, but white is ahead already. Or that's the second variation that you still need to calculate. What happens if the rook takes on f3? Well, then instead of simply taking back, you have checks available, and these are bishop to f6 or bishop to h6. Both are followed with a mate then with queen to g7. So as long as you don't take on f3 straight away, it's also winning for white. Okay, then what about the move rook c7 to e7? The solution is, again, we simply take on g7, and black cannot take the bishop due to the rook on e8 under attack. How about queen to d7? Again, this move loses to bishop take g7, and the queen cannot take on g7 due to the fact that the rook is unguarded. So these were the easier choices, and now your goal is to refute the stronger ones. So let's start with this move first. I will actually play it on the board, and your task is to find a winning continuation for white. Now let's solve it. There are 2 different options. One of these are winning quite fast and easy, and it's something that is for me harder to spot. It is the maneuver of playing rook to d3. So if you go through all the possibilities, checks, well, there are none. What are the captures? Only on e7 and g7. And then there is nothing clear available. Or you can also think about the threat. This is something out of the box, because you, for one move, forget completely about the attack and just attack the queen, but at the same time the threat is to win the queen, or to mate black on the back rank. And technically it's a bit better if you take on d7 and play rook d3 thereafter, but both of these continuations win for white. The other move that is actually harder should be harder to see, but that I have gotten more of a reply from my students, is the move bishop takes g7 with the following continuation. You give a check, you give a check here, because all of it is a check. That's why usually my students at least just go through the check variation until the end, and then they have spotted there is another check that, well, loses the rook obviously, but wins the queen at the same time, and that results in a winning endgame for white. It's not a mate, but it's still a win, just some moves later. Both of these options are equally fine. The one with the rook d3 is for me harder to spot, but if you go by the routine, then it's less mistakes that you can do. Whereas this one you need to calculate further, but if you win, you win. So the move rook e7 is also lost by two different lines. And then let's check the move rook to d8, for example. So how about this one? Let's make it on the board. So the solution for white is a bit of a boring one, but it still wins. You just play rook to g3. The idea is pretty simple. You win the bishop. If you win the bishop, you win the game, since you are, well, equal on material, but the king is still, well, almost made. Then that means that black has to defend the bishop. If he does it with the queen, then you can take and win the queen through queen takes e6 check, because the queen is pinned. Again, a winning endgame. Or if black defends with the rook, there is a check first, and thereafter there is the move rook to g5 that sets up the mate again. So black can obviously return his queen, but white still wins the game. So maybe final line rook f7, defends h5 for a single move, because now black has to take due to the threat of queen to h8 mate, and now he has well, to give up his queen, and thereafter white has a winning endgame yet again. And so we move back to the start, and we see look for the, well, most important and obvious move rook to f8. And here again, your task is to find a winning continuation for white. Now the solution is that you take on g7. There you have to calculate two different lines. First of it is rook takes g7, and the other one is rook takes f3. And I will do it over the board to make it a bit easier and just show you the solution instead of, well, trying to keep you here. So if black takes with the rook, that's quite easy actually to compare to the other variation to calculate. You give a check. Black has to defend this rook. That means he has to play either rook f8 to f7, but this loses straight away. So we get the endgame with several pawns of material more. Or after the move rook g7 to f7, there is the file mate rook g3 check. Then we get our queen to h6, and finally this is not a mate yet, but black is forced to play rook h7, and he gets mated with this sequence. So it's 7 moves that you need to calculate, or 5 moves starting from here, but for my students it wasn't a big of a problem, since all of the moves were with a check. The move that is a bit harder to calculate, but at the same time there is an easier way to go about this, is rook takes f3, because first of all there is a winning continuation, and I will show you this. But at the same time, if you just, first of all, you should move the bishop away with a check. If you just move the bishop back and then you take the rook, then it still is a good continuation for you, because you, well, just won black's rook compared to the starting position, and then the attack is still continuing. So at least you can be sure that it was a good sequence for you. But if you go with the active moves, there is a way to win the queen, and it goes like this. So king moves to f8, and then you just give checks from the side. So this is the check. It doesn't matter how black continues. For example, he can start with this, but the end result is that you force the king to move to d7. You finish up with queen d8 check and queen d1, and then you win the game. So if you would ask how should you technically defend in this position, so first of all, the right move is queen a4, because this is the only out of all these possibilities that does not lose you the game. The rook is protected, the rook protects e6, so there is no check here, and at the same time you protect, keep the bishop protected. And for example, if white continues with rook to g3, you follow up with rook to e7, and the position is still fine for black. So if you're black in the starting position, you should play queen a4, and the whole idea of defending on a high level is that you really, as black, do check all the possible variations, and you try to be sure that you are not getting lost or mated in any of them. And if you do that, well, then you have reached a higher level of calculation, and it obviously means that you will most certainly get more points in your games.